There's currently a shortage of high-quality research tailored to channel-focused business strategies. That's why we've initiated our study to help fill this void as the leading global technology solutions brokerage, focusing on accelerating technology advisor success to help you. Through some engaging content, graphics, and videos, technology advisors will learn the following in an ebook-style report. 1. Explore the factors influencing the IT purchasing decisions that top CXOs will be faced with over the next 5 years. 2. Gain valuable insights into some buying behaviors and trends from high-growth Telarus technology advisors. 3. Discover opportunities and suggested action items to enhance customers' capabilities with some cutting-edge solutions. And lastly, leverage some timely content to distribute to customers as sales activities arise. The Telarus Tech Trends Report is a valuable resource for aiding technology advisors in the sales conversations in the year ahead. Welcome to the podcast that's designed to fuel your success in selling technology solutions. I'm your host, Josh Lopresto, SVP of Sales Engineering at Telarus, and this is Next Level Biz Tech. Everybody, welcome back. Today we are talking about CX. We've got hospitality, safety, and more. More importantly, though, we're talking about how to revolutionize communications through integrations. Today on with us, we have got Chris Burgy, VP of Corporate Development from Ooma. Chris, welcome on, my man.
Josh, thanks for having me.
Chris, I love to hear, we were just joking about good windy paths into how you got to where you're at. So not Ooma yet. I want to hear about your path. My next question is going to be about Ooma, but just tell us about your path, man. I mean, where did you start? How did you get here?
Yeah, so I'm a bit of an odd journey and story. So I originally came out of corporate IT, funny enough, and wound up working for what we would now term a SaaS company, but an ASP company doing sales for a little bit, and then wound up co-owning a VAR MSP with a partner. That's where I first got exposed to UC back in 2005. Old school network server engineer, had a bunch of Juniper certifications, Cisco certifications, and then wound up going to work for ShoreTel, and completely different change of path for me. I went down the corporate development path, which is strategy, M&A, and so that ultimately led me to Ooma.
Love it. I love the background, too. I think it's good foundationally, right? You know how the bits and bytes work, so you have such a different maybe purview into this that I think others don't see that might step into that role.
Really helpful. I mean, I've done personal installations of what's so funny. There's a major game company, and I designed the data center for them in Los Angeles, implemented all that on Juniper equipment. So yeah, totally hands-on in the VAR days, did a bunch of UC deployments with ShoreTel, and you never forget that. I still tinker around with stuff on the networking side.
Oh yeah. We can't. We got to know how it works. We got to take it apart.
Exactly.
So if I think back, my first iterations of Ooma and what I think the general public might have known as Ooma is started out as a residential VoIP product. So there might be some of our partners who still don't know how big and how commercialized Ooma is and the business offering. So help us understand Ooma of 5 to 10 years ago versus Ooma now.
Yeah, and it's and you're kind of spot on there. Most folks who recognize the brand still know us from the residential days, and believe it or not, that's still a growing business for us. And frequently we run into folks that, oh, I have an Ooma Telo in my house, or my parents have an Ooma Telo, or my aunt or uncle. But we recognize that there eventually would be a long tail decline, obviously, in home phone service. And we had folks that were taking that little Telo product into the micro SMB segment. So think of a florist shop, auto body shop. And it was a bit of an aha moment for the company about 11 years ago. So we wound up building a UCaaS platform focused on SMB. And about 5 years ago, the focus shifted to the business portfolio predominantly, and that's now the majority of our revenue, believe it or not. So a bit of a fascinating transition. But unique too, because we built hardware, which is really unusual for a SaaS company. And also coming from the consumer side, there's a lot of ethos for us around simplicity in deployment, simplicity in management that's necessary in the consumer market, but translates well, obviously, to the business space.
Well, I think you learn a lot too, and that actually was my first foray years and years ago with Ooma. I had a friend that called me. You know how when you're in tech, people are like, "Oh, I'm gonna call you for everything." It's like that guy that has a truck. Like
Yep.
all of a sudden, all your friends are always moving. thing. A buddy called me and said, "Hey, I got this thing from Costco. Can you help me set it up?" And I'm like, "This is cool. What is this? I didn't know these were out yet, kind of thing." So I love that. If you can take what you learn from residential and figure that out to make the individual consumer happy, I think that just makes it so much easier to figure out the business side with
It
lessons
it
learned.
certainly does. Certainly does.
So let's talk about this is about, I think you guys have some very interesting verticals, niches. So I want to get into that a little bit. So talk to me about industries, verticals that Ooma is mostly working with, and what are some of the challenges that you guys are solving over there?
Yeah, and we're horizontal, of course, like everybody is in the space, but what we've come to realize is there was some gravitation that occurred initially with the platforms into certain verticals. And it was a bit of an aha moment for us to go build deeper in that. So we found a lot of success in the retail vertical, insurance agents, believe it or not, healthcare, where we've built integrations like into Next Health, which is focused on dentists and really automating a lot of the workflows for them. And Screen Pop becomes really interesting. To hospitality, which is a really fascinating space because they're so far behind on the conversion over to cloud. And it just didn't make sense for years and years for them. So that's a burgeoning market, even though we consider UCaaS more generally fairly mature at this point. And we have our eyes set on some other spaces. There'll be another integration coming out later this fall. So really strengthening that story so it's more than just, hey, here's a phone system to these customers, but here's how it really helps with business process flow. Customer experience is big. So you think of the case of the dentist, pop-up visits and balance due and all that. So there's a lot of fascinating opportunity here around integrations that really add value, frankly, into customers.
Yeah, I think that hits home for a lot of our partners that we see a lot of people provider side struggle with hospitality. And so you guys, it's awesome to see you guys doubling down on that. Can we unpack that for just a second? When it comes to
Sure.
hospitality, and the title of this has integrations in it, so I got to go into the integrations a little bit. What
Of
are
course.
what are some of those integrations that if partners hear this, we do this really well? Help us unpack that.
Yeah, and so you look at hospitality in particular, and bear in mind for this space, a lot of them are, the majority of them are still on on-prem PBXs, Mitel systems from years ago, NAC, some Avaya, and it didn't make financial sense. It's a bit of an odd case because they may be a lot of seats, but most of those are rooms, and nobody really uses the phone in the
Mhm.
rooms, but legally they're required to have phones in there for emergency purposes. And so the first bit was a financial model that recognizes that situation for them. Front office, back office, reception, that's all normal UCaaS stuff. But you have to deal with the rooms in a really cost-effective way, often with lots of analog, for instance. And then the second thing is all of these on-prem systems were integrated into property management systems. So check in, and you want to be able to reset voicemail, change caller ID on it. The cleaning staff will actually go up to the phones and hit codes to indicate room clean. So there's a bunch of specific workflow around this segment that is really critical and they expect. And so for us, we actually built an integration into Jazzware, which is a middleware provider that integrates into practically every property management system out there. And so it makes this transition really, really easy for property owners in the hospitality space to migrate. And they want to move, right? They recognize we're really behind the times and it's expensive now to have to call somebody out to do moves, adds, and changes on my on-prem PBX, and
Mhm.
turnover is high, so you're constantly retraining people. So there's a lot of benefit to a cloud consumption model for someone like that.
Yeah. Do you find that Jazzware solves most of the PMS integration needs that you have? Or are there any other integrations that you go, we gotta do this one here, this one here, this one here, or is that the one should we just focus on? If Jazzware integrates into it, problem can be solved.
That's the one, and it's frankly why we elected to have the partnership with Jazzware because they've done this for years with all the PMS vendors, and so it just made it easy. Instead of having to integrate into 25 different
Yeah.
PMS solutions,
Yeah.
you just do it through Jazzware, and the use case on our side is relatively straightforward, right? You want all the call detail records to flow up so you can bill for long distance if they choose to do that. Reset caller ID, voicemail, wake up calls, cleaning staff codes, et cetera. So it's
Awesome.
great.
Good. Let's talk about the evolution of the telco side of the world. We POTS lines are still around; they are still cranking. And look at just honestly, I mean, We see what we want to happen in this space and the time we wish it would happen, and modernization, and we realize it just takes a lot longer than we're expecting things are going to take. So this has created this huge drive for POTS replacement, right? Which you guys have a great offering at. So talk to me about what are you seeing in the market? Because, you know, obviously just generally, but then when you're niche in hospitality, you see a lot. And how do you guys help with that? What's the product? What's the strategy?
Yeah, it's a fascinating space, and we first became aware of it 3.5 years ago, and it was in discussions with some retailers in the Northeast. And Verizon was going through deprecation of copper at that time, converting over to fiber. And folks were paying $40 to $60 a month for a copper line. They started to run into issues with certain specialty devices, and prices were starting to inch up. So it was a bit of an aha moment for us because we have all the pieces in the portfolio. We've been doing cellular connectivity as well. So we cobbled all that together into a unified solution called AirDial. And you fast forward, and some interesting things have happened since then. Most importantly, two things in 2019. The first is the FCC allowed the incumbent carriers to deprecate the old copper network at their pace. There's no mandate on time frame, so it's totally up to
Mhm.
what they want to do. More importantly, they gave them what's called forbearance. So previously, the lines were regulated into the CLEC competitive local exchange market. All that went away. And so now the incumbent LECs are going pretty crazy on price increases. And they're doing it for two reasons. One, to get revenue back from churn, frankly, and two, is a forcing function for customers. So it's not uncommon for us to run into customer accounts that are paying $400 to $600 a month for a POTS line, and it's just going to continue
Whew.
to go up. It's really crazy, and we have some extreme examples that are over $1,000. And so the problem here is a lot of the easy situations to migrate have moved over to VoIP. I mean, they have been doing that for years. And so you're left with millions of lines and businesses that are a lot of specialty devices out there, things that our space historically said, we'll just go put those on a POTS line. We don't
Mhm.
have anything to do with it. And so it's things like commercial burglar, fire panels, elevators, blue light safety phones. There's a whole bunch of gate entry, building entry systems, SCADA systems. We see sensors, CO2 sensors. So it's pretty wild. And the issue now is there's a risk factor for a lot of organizations. If your POTS line stops working, for instance, fire inspector comes in and it's your fire panel or elevator, you can have your certificate of occupancy revoked on that building. And then secondly, there's a really compelling ROI story now. It's a bit of a slam dunk if they're paying that much for their lines and they know that it's only going to continue to increase. So in the last 6 months, we've seen a real shift in awakening, frankly, in the market, in particular with much larger organizations. So you get into companies that have thousands of lines. They recognize we don't want to be the last one standing here trying to solve for this. The risk is unacceptable. So we need to get ahead of this and plan that migration for all of these devices. So it's a really great time to jump in the space. And frankly, you can look like a hero because you're saving them so much
Yeah.
with the solution. So
Yeah.
it's really fascinating, and there's a lot of great value. So all our solutions fully cloud managed. There's an SD-WAN technology that's coming in shortly, cellular and wireline connectivity. You can get notifications via SMS and email, which you couldn't get on POTS lines. So there's
Mhm.
a whole bunch of really neat additions for folks as they make this migration. And it's different than UCaaS too, right? This is a set it and forget it situation. You're not going and mucking with settings after you're in. It's a device that needs a POTS line and that's it. So you get the project in, they're going to keep it for a really long time because they don't want to touch these devices. It doesn't
Well,
doesn't make sense.
yeah. I mean, I hope what everybody's seeing out of this and hearing out of this is that you guys really do have a well-rounded product suite, and you're continuing to expand it. I mean, yes, it is not just UCAS. There's a lot more here to unpack than that. I mean, it's funny the things that you mentioned that this solves for. You know, when you talk about blue light phones, you talk about just analog lines, you talk about elevators, you talk about alarms, all these things, and lack of notifications. We get requests for these things very a la carte and very random. So it's awesome to see all of these things kind of come together. And then, oh, by the way, we have killer hospitality integrations and financial modelings. Oh, by the way, yes, we do the UCAS, all of the traditional UCAS things that you would expect as well. So really well, I think really well rounded out portfolio. So good stuff there.
Yeah, and really meaty opportunity. And here's kind of a good example. companies are looking at this standalone, of course, but as they're going through migrations, it's been curious for us. We have a Fortune 100 company brought in through one of our partners, and they're going through a conversion from Avaya to Teams.
Hmm.
And through that project, they suddenly realized we have about 10,000 POTS lines across all of our facilities. Teams isn't going to solve for that. We have to do something at the same time to fully shut down everything else. So it's a great attachment when you're going in and talking about UCaaS to have the same conversation around, well, what are you going to do with all these POTS lines? Some may be running through your on-prem PBX. There's still have one.
Yeah, I mean, is there anything I do want to go into kind of the meat of a deal or an opportunity? Is there anything that you see or kind of you've uncovered as you go into one of these? Let's maybe talk a little bit about a typical deal that you help with. What I like to hear here in this part is things don't always end the way they start. And it might be,
Yep.
hey, Chris, I've got this one thing. And then you get into it and you go, oh my gosh, so you got 25 problems that we probably could help you solve. And so the hard part becomes, oh my gosh, how do we deal with that? How do we phase in the implementation of this? So maybe just walk us through a deal that you got brought into. What was the problem? And then kind of how did that come to fruition on the outcome?
Yeah, absolutely. So here's a good one that's in the retail space on POTS, and we should talk about hospitality too, because that's obviously different. But company has fire, commercial burglar, and then either elevator or fax, believe it or not, is still a big use case here too. And prices were going up. They had some locations where the lines were being decommissioned
Mm.
out there. So it's a competitive local exchange carrier that's just shutting it off. And they just couldn't run the risk. And they're paying a fair amount for the lines in that particular case. And what's interesting is one, a lot of folks don't recognize the compliance requirements around life safety systems like fire. There are very specific rules around fire panels and how those can operate over devices like ours. And 70% of the panels are what I'd like to say more modern. They can use a standard called Contact ID, but inevitably in every environment, they have old panels that operate like modems.
Mm-hmm.
And that's particularly challenging that a lot of customers don't recognize. Um, the other piece is inventory. So oftentimes they haven't looked at this stuff in years and years, or the person who handled it retired and they just kept paying the bills. So getting your arms around a full inventory, including lines that aren't in use. And we run into that often too. And this is a great opportunity for the channel to come in and do some coaching, kind of Tim, on the whole thing. But save them money on lines that they're not paying for. And then the last is um, there's a bit of fear around it because you've wound up with IT kind of owning these types of systems where it typically was telephony, voice team, or facilities even. So, they think that it's more complicated and complex than it is. And again, it's not like a UCaaS deployment where you're doing all these call routing rules,
Yeah.
handling contact center, for instance. It's just physical wiring. You're having to touch 66 blocks or 110 blocks, for instance. But it's all very pragmatic and easy to plan out. And when you're touching thousands of locations, it does take time. It's the other thing that folks don't realize. You're not going to do this in 2 months.
Yeah.
But once it's all said and done, then they can just move on to the next project. On the hospitality side, it's interesting for them. Often we come in because they're concerned about the cost of that on-prem PBX. Their PRIs, believe it or not,
Yes.
a ton of PRIs are going up, and they just don't want to band-aid a PBX anymore with SIP if supports SIP. And again, the cost structure was important for the room. So having a really attractive model for handling the rooms is critical. And then again, maintaining that property management system integration and making it turnkey and easy. So, high density analog gateways, which we do, are really important in that sort of setting. And they want to be more modern. And it's easier with smaller properties too. You get into big corporate owned chains, longer decision-making cycle
Oh, yeah.
there, of course. But you've got a smaller group that owns 50 hotels, 100 hotels. They can move much more rapidly. But great story for them.
Yeah. Are you just curious? Are you finding out with some of those high density, analog situations? Are you finding out that you can still just leverage the inside wiring and tie it into your platform, and all as well?
Yeah, yeah. And in many cases, and also funny thing. So years ago, I remember these guys from ShoreTel, this company called FiBridge, that would allow you to leverage existing copper wiring, Cat3 wiring, and run IP phones over. We run into that too, where they don't have Cat 5 or Cat 6 into some areas, and they want to put an IP phone in. So they're just fascinating environments. It's like looking back in time 20 to 30 years ago, and nothing's really changed.
It is, yes. Good stuff. All right. Final couple thoughts here. So again, the audience are out of our partners here. Maybe it's partners that haven't tackled this segment or aren't tackling UCaaS at all, and maybe are in something adjacent. So I love, my favorite advice to give is, here are the questions to ask. I know they're not the end all be all, but it is a little bit of a, how do I step in to just uncover if there's opportunities? And when I get interested information or interested parties, I can say, oh yeah, great. I've got people, right? I've got engineers at Telarus. I've got resources on the Ooma team. I can bring some folks back in to help. So help us out with the front end of that. What are some of the top best 3-4 questions you can give partners about how to have this conversation and uncover?
Yeah. Again, depends on the solution. So on the AirDial front, great first question is, what are you doing? Are you aware of what's happening with copper lines? And can I get a copy of your bill to look at? Because they're going away and you have a real risk factor here. And I'd like to help you through the journey of a great ROI on this investment. And then the second is understanding the risk profile for life safety systems as well. Do you have elevators in your environment? Do you have fire panels? And making sure that you're not going to get in trouble with a fire inspector. And it's a pretty easy conversation when you start that way, and you know that you're going to wind up saving them money and keep them in compliance. On the hospitality front, similarly, you can go into the hotel and see, but what are you doing with your old PBX? How much are your bills going up for PRIs? What's it like with turnover in your environment, and how do you make changes in that environment to the system given that turnover? And wouldn't you like to be on a more modern cloud solution that keeps this all really simple for you? And so those are all good initial starting points on conversation. And of course, you can reach out to channel support at Ooma.com or our channel chief, Kathy Mazza. Obviously, you guys, we're all here to help people through that journey and make sure you're asking the right questions and backstop you in it. But again, great opportunity in both of these segments because they're early days in the conversion cycle.
Final question then. Let's look out here. Let's think about the future and kind of what the opportunity is out there. Help me understand from your perspective. I think you've helped us uncover now, right? If I go take your advice, and am I running with that for the next 12 months? Do you see any kind of different evolutions coming in that you want partners to consider? Is it just, no, double down on what I gave you and do that for the next 12 months? Or, any other innovations that you kind of want to allude to?
Yeah, obviously for these two segments, there's going to be a long tail conversion cycle on them. So they're both great to go after. You set those aside and look at our space more broadly. AI obviously is coming into play, and there are use cases that will be interesting. In particular, we've got a company that's building with us on our platform in the retail space. It's call deflection to remove the cost of front of house staffing, basically, if you think of restaurants. So they're not answering basic questions on orders, et cetera. So that's a great use case for general entities outside of the contact center. And then the other thing I'd leave you with is Microsoft is obviously on everybody's mind in the space, and Teams is a fantastic solution for a knowledge worker environment. They're doing great in the enterprise. But the reality is, for the likes of Teams, it's just not palatable for smaller organizations. They're not going to pay a Microsoft partner to come in and do a complex installation. Again, being an old server network guy, I have an Office 365 account. If you go in and attempt to configure voice in Teams, like, your head will explode the way that they've done it. And so it really leaves this nice white space, frankly, down market in the SMB segment. Go get it, because they want something turnkey, simple, very easy. That's all they care about. And that's not going to change for the foreseeable future. I just don't see Microsoft simplifying this enough anytime soon.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. Your head will explode if you do try to go configure it. It's possible. We think people have done it on their own. We don't know where they are yet, and we haven't put them into captivity to study them. But it's definitely a little more complex in the admin interface than I expected it to be right out of the gate, for sure.
Yes, it is.
Awesome stuff. All right, Chris, my man, that wraps us up for today. I really appreciate you coming on, dude.
Perfect. Thanks for having me, Josh.
All right, everybody, that wraps us up today. Chris Burgy, VP of Corporate Development at Ooma. I'm your host, Josh Lopresto, SVP of Sales Engineering at Telarus, and this is Next Level Biz Tech.
Next Level Biz Tech has been a production of Telarus Studio 19. please visit Teleris.com for more information.